This is Charles Johnson. I'm here in St. Martinville, Louisiana with Jeff Durand, who's president of the Louisiana Rice Growers Association. Jeff, we're here in mid-April, and the rice planting is just about completed in South Louisiana. As we get into this new season, could you talk a little bit about what concerns rice growers have, what's on rice producers' minds as we get going here in 2009?
I guess our major concern is the markets. That 50% of what's grown in the U.S. is exported, and export markets prices aren't as good as they were the past year when we planted. And there's a lot of concerns on growers' minds on where price will be at harvest time this year. One of the key markets that we'd like to see open again is the Cuban market. We just had word that the president has allowed freer travel to Cuba, and we're hoping that the markets to Cuba will be opened up again where trade can go back to normal. Cuba was our largest buyer back in the early 60s, and right now Cuba imports right around 600,000 metric tons of rice, and that market would be, if we recaptured that market, would be one of our largest markets for the U.S. exports.
Now, exports are a very major thing for the U.S. rice industry. I think, half of our rice is exported? Is that correct?
That's correct. 50% of what's grown in the U.S. is exported. And Mexico right now is our largest market. If Cuba would open up, that would be just about match the Mexico market.
But Louisiana exports an even bigger percentage of its rice, right?
That's correct. Nearly 80% of what's grown in Louisiana is exported.
Really? That's a lot. Now, is this world economic downturn, do you see it having a big effect on U.S. rice exports?
Yes, countries don't have the funds available to buy rice at a higher price. Even though it's costing us more money to grow rice than it did 2 years ago, we're still struggling to sell on a world market price scale, whereas other countries can sell it for cheaper than we can.
Mm-hmm. Did the currency situation with the dollar, did that have much of an impact on rice exports last year when the dollar kind of got upside down versus the euro on that? Did that have much of an impact?
I think it did last year. That's part of the reason we were able to sell so much rice when we did last year. But when things turned back around, it made U.S. rice a little less appealing on the world market.
So another hurdle for rice farmers.
Now, one other thing we're looking at is, even though we export 50% of what's grown in the U.S., nearly 20% of what's consumed in the U.S. is imported rice, and the majority of that is Thai jasmine. Louisiana Rice Research Station has developed a new jasmine variety that we feel is competitive with the Thai jasmine, and we're hoping to recapture some of the lost market to Thai jasmine imports. Another market that we're having problems with was we export a lot of rice to Canada also, and some of the Canadians are buying Thai jasmine now. So if we can develop a jasmine variety that can compete with the Thai jas, we can recapture some of those markets in Canada.
Now, you're going to be growing some of the Louisiana jasmine here on your own farm, correct?
That's correct. We're one of the first growers to actually grow the new Jasmine variety, which is a jasmine type, on a commercial scale. And we are growing some for seed to increase seed production for next year, but some of it will be milled and marketed here.
Well, it's good to see some promising new things coming along for the rice industry. You also grew hybrid rice here, correct? How did that look last year?
We were doing really well last year with our hybrid as well as conventional rice, but the hybrid had a little yield advantage until Hurricane Gustav came in and took out most of what we had left to grow, what we had left to harvest.
That hurricane hit pretty hard on crops around here, didn't it?
Yeah, we lost about a third of our crop. I had some neighbors lost 100% of what they were growing.
Oh, that's a big hit. Now, you're also a crawfish producer, and the hurricanes in recent years have had an impact on production of crawfish, right? A big negative impact Could you fill us in a little bit about that?
Yeah, in our case, with the Hurricane Gustav, we had 20 inches of rain, and which put too much water at the wrong time. With that, after the hurricane was done, we had Hurricane Ike came in 3 weeks later and dumped a lot of salt water in some of the southern parishes and ruined some of the crawfish production there. Behind that, we caught a drought. Ended up with a drought, which hurt production in other areas, and then a cool fall and cold winter slowed down the growing season for the crawfish.
So there's not as much crawfish out there on the market as there normally would be at this time of year. Is that right?
No, the production is way down. We're probably about 40% less than we had last year this time.
Are prices up for crawfish?
Prices have been higher, and rightfully so, because production is so low. Bait prices are higher, production costs are higher, and many of the farmers are still barely breaking even at the prices we're receiving now.
But there's still good demand in Louisiana for crawfish, right?
Yes, for right now there's high demand, and we're hoping it stays and we can continue to harvest without losses. Lent months, the last week before Easter is probably the strongest demand.
Mother's Day is another big time for crawfish?
That's right. Here in South Louisiana, Mother's Day is we do sell a lot of crawfish for that weekend.
Now with crawfish, I've heard that one of the problems in recent years has been big losses to birds eating the crawfish. And I hear that the crawfish producers here have a working wetlands initiative, which you're trying to get through Washington, D.C. Could you tell us a little bit about the proposal and what you're hoping that working wetlands initiative accomplishes?
Okay, the Working Wetlands Initiative was started about 2 years ago by the Louisiana Farm Bureau Crawfish Advisory Committee. We had problems with birds, numbers growing, and seeing that the wildlife was taking a good portion of our crop out the farm before we could actually harvest them. So this initiative was introduced to give incentives to growers to continue doing what they've been doing and providing that habitat to try and offset some of the losses that we're having from the wildlife. We're hearing more and more growers getting out of the business and not flooding those fields anymore and just going back to dry crops, which has no habitat advantage for these water birds. If USDA and the public would like us to continue doing what we're doing at no cost, we need some type of incentive to try and offset some of the risk involved in flooding those farms for crawfish during the fall months.
Are you working with any particular members of Congress on this?
Well, actually, we were trying to work through NRCS, the USDA, with programs that already exist and possibly getting this initiative or pilot program started with NRCS somehow through
things. So, Jeff, what kind of impact is the new Farm Bill having on rice producers here in Louisiana?
Well, Farm Bill be implemented the way Congress intended it to be. The administration doesn't make onerous changes that would prevent producers from getting some of the payments that they much needed.
Well, once again, thank you, Jeff. It's good talking to you. And this is Charles Johnson reporting for Farm Journal and Top Producer Magazines.